Motivation is one of the most misunderstood concepts we have. We talk about it as if it's something you either have or you don't, as if motivated people wake up every day feeling energized, clear, ready to take on the world, while everyone else is somehow falling short. That story is not only unhelpful, it's also inaccurate. If you've ever started something with genuine intention and then struggled to maintain it, the issue was not a lack of motivation. More often than not, the deeper issue was your judgment. Because when judgment goes up, motivation goes down. That's not some motivational quote, it's a psychological reality. The more we criticize ourselves, compare ourselves, or demand unrealistic standards, the less capacity we have to move forward. Motivation simply does not thrive under pressure, shame, or self-attack. It thrives under clarity, self-trust, and achievable actions. This is something that we've explored in depth in recent Happiness Hack episodes, and we're halfway through January now, so I want to check in. How's your motivation going? How was your goal setting in early January, and are you achieving those retainable small wins? This episode is going to focus on why motivation fades, meaning endures, and why tiny consistent actions are going to be far more powerful than these dramatic short-lived bursts of effort. Today is going to build directly on the foundations that you have already laid, because meaning gives us direction, but the momentum is what carries us forward. The momentum is what we can build through small, manageable actions and goals paired with some self-compassion. You're listening to The Happiness Hack with Tim Coulson, the podcast where we take evidence-based psychology, strength-based healing, and real-life experience, and then turn them into simple, practical tools for living with more intention, resilience, and everyday happiness. And today, we're talking about motivation. So let's get into it. The reality is that most people do not struggle with motivation at the beginning of a task. At the start of this new goal, our motivation is always high. We're excited, we're optimistic, and there's a strong emotional pull towards this change. The dopamine is doing its job. It's helping us imagine a new and better future. It's nudging us into action. The challenge comes when that emotional surge settles. Be real here. On January 1st, how were you feeling? It's now about January the 14th, or a couple of days later if you're listening to this. How are you feeling now? Because life continues. Energy fluctuates. Stress shows up. It's natural for our motivation to dip, not because something has gone wrong, but because that's how our human nervous system works. And this is the point where judgment often enters the room. I should be doing more. I was doing so well. Why can't I keep it up? Other people have managed it. What's wrong with me? Each of those thoughts stacks on top of each other, and it adds extra pressure. Each one increases our own self-criticism, our own intrinsic motivation to continue. And as judgment increases, motivation drops further. Not because we're failing, but because our system is responding exactly as it's designed to do. As human beings, we move away from threat. And self-judgment, self-criticism, it's experienced by the brain as a threat. When we understand this, we start to learn how important it is to really praise ourselves when we get forward progress. It's not being simplistic. It's not being patronizing. It's keeping our intrinsic motivation moving. One of the simplest ways to understand motivation is to imagine a seesaw. When motivation goes up, judgment naturally comes down. But when judgment rises, the motivation falls. When judgment is low, motivation has space to grow. As judgment rises, motivation gets pushed down. And this is why people often feel most motivated when they feel supported, encouraged, and understood. And if you've got an accountability partner in your life, that's great. But if you don't, I'm here for you as well. I'm here to keep you on track. But most importantly, keep yourself on track. Practice that self-compassion. Practice giving yourself a little bit of space to feel encouraged and supported. Because when motivation collapses, it's so quickly because of our harsh self-talk. If you are anything like me, then you are your own harshest critic. So if no one else is criticizing you, why would you continue to criticize yourself? This matters because most of the traditional approaches to motivation, they rely on ramping up that pressure. Let's push harder. Let's raise the stakes. Let's demand more discipline. But in reality, that approach backfires because our motivation is not fueled by a fear of failure. It's fueled by a sense of capability and trust. When you believe that effort counts, even imperfect effort, you are far more likely to keep going. And this is important. Anything that drives you forward is worthwhile. You can't fail if you have the mindset of, I'm learning, I'm evolving. Sure, it may not have worked today, but what did you learn from this scenario? This comes into play when we start to understand our intrinsic motivation and our inner scripts, how much we have to give. Because one of the most damaging myths throughout culture is the idea that effort only counts when it looks impressive. We all hear stories of people that have worked harder than anyone else, out-hustled, grind for days. But let's be real. There are days when you feel energized and focused, and there are days when it might feel like it's just too much. There are days when our capacity is limited. We're tired, emotionally stressed, or simply carrying more than we usually do. Here's where a powerful reframe comes into action. Some days we only have 20% to give. And that's okay. Because if we give everything of that 20%, then we've just given 100% of what we have. That's not lowering the bar. That is responding honestly to your capacity. Motivation grows when effort is matched to reality. If we can demand our output that matches our capacity, we create progress. But when we demand output that exceeds our capacity, we enter shutdown. So it's so important that we meet ourselves where we are, because when we do that, momentum becomes possible. Now, how can we understand where we are and how can we build momentum? Well, this is where the small wins framework that we've discussed earlier comes into action. If you've listened along to the goal setting episode, then you know that small wins work because they scale our effort to match our capacity. They allow progress without overwhelm, and they build trust rather than eroding it. Now, I've talked to my partner Sarah, and she's okay with me mentioning this. She was struggling with her latest release of her novel. She'd reached a point where she was just overwhelmed. She knew she needed to edit it, but that seemed like too much to do. So we sat down and I said, well, what can you do? What is capable today? Are you able to do one chapter? She looked at me with this expression and said, of course I can do one chapter. And I said, well, do it. What's the problem with doing just one chapter today? And I could see the clarity come through her eyes. I could see the motivation build in her body language. And she said, yeah, I can do one chapter today. She ended up doing 3, but that's not the story here. The story is that that small win was able to build the momentum. It was able to overcome the overwhelming sense of, I've got an entire book to build, to edit, to redo, because momentum is built. It's not found. Many people wait for that motivation to arrive before they take action. In practice, motivation often follows the action, and it's not the other way around. Momentum is what bridges that gap. Momentum is the sense that we're moving, that our effort is accumulating, and that stopping would take more energy than continuing. It does not come from one big decision. It comes from repeated follow-through on small commitments. That's why our manageable goals are so much more important. Because when our goals are too large or too vague, then they require the motivation to sustain them. But when goals are small and specific, they generate the momentum, and the momentum sustains the motivation. Now, I've got to be clear. This is not about doing less. It's about doing what is sustainable enough for you to repeatedly action it. So, in the goal setting episode, we explored why large New Year's goals often fail. And that was because they relied heavily on momentum and motivation. And that assumed capacity that may not exist consistently. So we talked about creating meaning, because meaning drives the motivation, and motivation is driven by the momentum. Small goals are specific, they're achievable, they fit into real days, not our ideal ones. The goal of being healthier is not necessarily a bad goal, but a goal like, I can walk for 10 minutes after dinner 3 times a week, gives your brain clarity. Clarity reduces friction. Reduced friction increases follow-through. Follow-through, you're getting it, guys. It builds momentum. This is not accidental. It's how behavior change works. We need to have space for us to practice self-compassion. It's often misunderstood as being soft, being too permissive. In reality, it is one of the strongest predictors of sustained motivation. Self-compassion allows you to acknowledge difficulty without adding to the blame. Because what is blame? Blame is judgment in disguise. So, self-compassion keeps you engaged instead of pushing you into the avoidance or the shutdown. Motivation may dip, and a self-critical response sounds like, I've failed again, I might as well stop. But a self-compassionate response sounds like, yeah, this is hard, but what is the smallest step I can take? The second response keeps you in the game. It's also how our momentum survives disruption, because disruption is inevitable. What matters is not avoiding it, but responding to it in a way that allows our momentum and our movement to continue to build. So we've talked about why motivation fades and meaning endures. Motivation is emotional and variable. Meaning is directional and stable. So when we feel like our momentum is dipping, like our motivation is dipping, we come back to the meaning. Meaning answers the question, why does this matter? Now, when we ask that, we can start to build our motivation, because our motivation answers the question, how can I move towards that right now? Small goals and momentum allow us to act in alignment with our meaning, even if that motivation dips. It prevents our all or nothing cycles that so often derail our progress. When our effort is directly connected to meaning, small actions feel worthwhile. When our effort is judged harshly, even the big actions start to feel empty. And this is why sustainable motivation is never about just energy. It's about alignment, compassion, and forward movement. Because we can't always have 100% energy. But if our sustainable motivation takes into account that, hey, today I'm not feeling fantastic, but I can just do a little bit. I can edit one chapter. So if your motivation has been struggling, try this shift. Stop asking yourself, how can I get my motivation? And start asking yourself, what is a realistic step forward that I can take today? This lowers judgment, increases clarity, and allows us to build that momentum. Some days the step will be small. Some days it'll be larger. Both count. Progress is not measured by intensity. It is measured by the consistency to move forward over time. So with all of this in mind, here is your happiness hack for the week. This is a simple, practical thing that you can do each morning. I want you to get your pen, your paper, whatever you're using to jot down your thoughts, and ask yourself, what capacity do I have to move forward today, and how can I do this honestly? Because when we get clear about that, the next step is to choose one small action that fits with that capacity and aligns with what matters to us. It's not the action that looks best on paper. It's not the action that we're telling ourselves we should take. It's the action you can actually follow through on. At the end of the day, acknowledge that effort without judgment. Our momentum grows when effort is recognized, not dismissed. How often have you taken a small step forward, but then been self-critical of yourself? And I should have done more. I should have been able to do this and this. Motivation doesn't need that pressure. It needs permission to build. And that's what we're doing. You're not failing. You are building momentum. 2026 is going to be an amazing year. If you are ready to take some serious steps forward, even if they're only small, why not book a session with me? tim-coulson.com. That's tim-coulson.com. And as always, guys, remember, the day is what you make it.